All right. Hello, everybody. I think we are live. Let me just triple check that everything is up and running. My name is Molly White. I'm here from the New Hampshire Department of Education, and I have Laura Porter here with me today. She is she's actually out on the West Coast, so it's noontime, lunchtime where she is, and she is volunteering here to help us talk about adverse childhood experiences and when behavior is not about choice. So let me pass the mic over to the expert over here. Laura, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. This is fun to be with all of you. So I plan to talk, 20, 25 minutes, just kind of breeze through a lot of material, and then hopefully you'll have questions or comments that I can help with. So I really wanted to focus on this idea today that student wellness is an intergenerational endeavor, and that it's all about community and the network of connections and relationships we have. And of course, at this time, that network of connections is challenging because we're still trying to work through how we keep those in a really healthy way. So I'm going to just start with the way human beings adapt to experience. That all of us are born with a brain and body that prepares for the world that our brain and body are anticipating that we'll be living in. And that anticipated world is based on our childhood experience. When we have a childhood experience where there are adults that are buffering the stress and giving us nurturance and protection, then we adapt in ways that make it easier for us to meet the societal expectations of us. But of course, not everybody lives in that world where there's an adult nearby within 20 minutes can get us into a calm state and can use those ancient traditions of calming like rocking and singing and rhythm, touch. Those ancient traditions are a big part of how we stay regulated and how our bodies are adapting in the world. But most of us live in a world where there's more danger than that, where there's stress, where there isn't an adult that's able or the societal conditions are such that the stress remains unbuffered, meaning there isn't somebody that can help us calm within a short amount of time and someone that we can model that calming from, sometimes called co-regulate with another adult so that we can learn how to calm. And what happens in that situation when we have unbuffered stress is that our bodies and our brains adapt to a world that we're anticipating will be a dangerous world. And those adaptations are actually pretty good for the species. They help us survive. And they can create pretty typical kinds of characteristics. We can become more hypervigilant. We're always watching for the next danger. We can be very quick to get into a highly emotional state, including anger, and then have a hard time shifting gears and soothing and calming back down. We can be very focused on now and have a hard time focusing on the longer term. We can also be more focused on ourselves and have a hard time being focused on the larger community around us or the ideas around community and society being something we contribute to. We might be much more oriented to, but I'm going to survive myself. And those are all pretty normal adaptations to growing up with a very stressful world. And I think those adaptations are important to remember because the adults that are currently at home taking care of their children have lived in this dangerous world when they were growing up. And so they may be having a harder time staying well regulated in the midst of stress and figuring out how they manage the time through the day. If they're more hypervigilant, they might be watching for all of the dangers around COVID-19, et cetera, and be very hyper-focused on that and have a more difficult time than focusing on their children and creating that safe container around the children. And people who grow up in their childhoods, they had a very safe world. They're going to also adapt to that set of experiences, and they will develop pretty typical characteristics. They'll be much more oriented toward process. They'll be more relationally oriented. They'll really love the kind of environment where we're able to brainstorm all sorts of opportunities and think about the choices around us. They'll be less centered on self and more centered on community and group and family, and better able to think about where we're headed as we flow through this time. And so people who grow up in a very safe world, those characteristics are very good for the species even when we're living in very good times. But those same individuals might have a hard time with COVID-19 when the time we're in right now, because they're thinking that all time is safe. And so how could we possibly need this shelter in place, these kinds of rules? They may be confused with what we're experiencing. So in either case, whether parents grew up in a dangerous world or in a very safe world, there may be things about the current situation that are challenging because of the adaptations that we had when we were children. And of course, the same process is happening now for the children as they're growing up. We know that what fires together wires together, meaning the neural network in our brains is developed based on our experience. And this is just a quick picture you may be familiar with of a handful of cells at birth. These are neurons, nerve cells in the brain. And you can see that when we're first born, those cells are healthy and robust, but they're not very well connected yet. And it's experience that connects up that network of cells and creates these go-to pathways that we rely on for our response to the world. And so by mid-elementary school, we have this rich neural network, this connectedness, and all these strong pathways that are largely created by our experience. So we've had a lot of danger, or fear, or terror. Those pathways that help us navigate those kinds of circumstances will be very, very strong. And the reverse is true. If we've lived in very safe times, the pathways that allow us to be more relationally oriented, et cetera, will be stronger. And then around the age of puberty, our brains go through a process called pruning, where the strongest pathways remain in place, and the pathways that are least used essentially fade into the shadows. They're still there. We know through stroke recovery and other kinds of scientific evidence that we can recover them, but it's hard to do. Once we've gone through pruning, the major pathways, our go-to pathways in the brain, are established, and we will be very good at those things. They create strength in the brain and in the body's response to stress. So the memory of these experiences in this time and throughout our childhoods is stored in our bodies. It's not just a cognitive process that has to do with thinking, it's also the body's response to the environment around us. And so I just want to mention some of the ways that people are changed by stressful times. The first way is that our way of processing our senses, our sight, smell, touch, etc., that sensory processing can be altered, and we can actually have a different sense of reality because what we're perceiving around us is based on those childhood experiences. Our ability to self-regulate, our self-soothe and calm ourselves, largely based on our childhood experience of getting thousands of repetitions of adults helping us calm, or maybe not getting that. And so having a hard time having that kind of automatic fluency around self-regulation. People can be changed in their spatial memory and their navigation through space. You may have friends that when you have them over, you kind of have to put the breakables up because they tend to run into things, or who tend to be lost a lot. They are going to a location where they've been many, many times, but now they can't quite find it. And you'll see this challenge in middle school and high school kids where they seem to be late for class. And we see communities begin to shift our expectations to understand that it could be that people are not really late, so to speak, they're really lost trying to find the location, and that simple aids can really make a difference. Our ability to focus our attention for long periods of time, our executive function skills, Our ability to perceive social cues can be changed by adverse experiences when we're young. And then, of course, mental and behavioral health challenges can emerge in early adulthood, typically from these adverse experiences. So I want to focus in on a couple of these, but really emphasize the idea that adversity creates adaptation. These are normal responses to adversity during development. And those adaptations, changes in our perceptions of sensory information, changes in our perception of social cues, our ability to self-regulate, etc., those adaptations are met by society's response. And so I go out in the world as an adapted person because of my childhood, and I present myself in societal environments, and I am met by society's response. And unfortunately, most of society's response has made adversity worse. And so we see this progression of adversity across the life course very typically in populations. But that doesn't have to be true. Society's response can make adversity better. It can reduce the sense of isolation or rejection or difficulty and challenges escalating in people's lives. And that's the era we live in now. It's a really exciting time to be alive because we're learning more and more about how do we respond and be present with people who've experienced a lot of adversity. And today I really want to focus on the fact that adults are creating the context for children's adversity or safety right now. Adults are creating the societal response, and they're also creating the conditions for children's experiences that will affect them throughout their lives. So when I think about intergenerational, I think about the power of parenting adults and that network of people around parenting adults, including teachers and administrators and neighbors and grocery workers and on, who are creating that context for adversity to be reduced over time. So there's in living systems, whether it's a human body or a family or a community or a forest or an ocean, all complex and adaptive living systems have principles that hold for across all of those systems. And one of those principles is that simple rules are driving very complex phenomenon. And so one of the simple rules that I like to keep in mind when I'm working with schools is this, this combination of 3 simple rules that can make the school environment and by extension the neighborhood, community, and the world environment a better place for all of us. So the first one is take care of yourself. The second is take care of others. And the last, take care of your school or your neighborhood or your community or your world. And as children are thinking of these rules, so are adults. And we can organize around rules that are simple like this and trust that these simple rules will manifest in a big shift in the cultural norms, in the safety, and in the development of well-being in children. So I wanted just to propose that we reflect a little bit today on a question. What ways of living through stressful times are children learning now? And you know, some of the world leaders in adversity, like Bruce Perry, are saying we need to turn off the news and only have scheduled time, and perhaps think about limiting access to some of that information to children. The stories we tell are very important for children to understand how we live through stressful times. Those of us who use creativity and art, like can we make sure that the children in the extended circles that we live in, we're sharing some of those stories about how we use art or creativity or music or drumming. And maybe we're even sending some supplies into a home that we can't actually be present in because of social distancing, but we can share our way of living through stressful times using art and music and drumming and dance and some of these really important methods for self-regulation. A friend of mine sent me this picture that I just love. I don't know who posted it, and I wish I did. If it was one of you, please let me know so I can thank you. But this poster says, and then the whole world walked inside, and they shut their doors, and they said, we will stop it all, everything, to protect our weaker ones, our sicker ones, our older ones. And nothing in the history of humankind ever felt more like love than this. So I don't know why that makes me emotional. It does, though, because we're living through a time where that should be the story for children. That love that we're sharing.
I completely agree, Laura. That was a really moving quote. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm. So let me talk a little bit about self-regulation. So self-regulation, according to Bessel van der Kolk, again, one of the leaders in trauma-informed care, he says that self-regulation depends on having a friendly relationship with your body. Without it, you have to rely on external regulation from medication or drugs, constant reassurance, compulsive compliance with others. And so when we think about maintaining a friendly relationship with our bodies through this time of stress, that's when we can think about how to share with children and with the parents and adults who are caring for the children. How do we live through stressful times? How do we build a friendly relationship with our bodies and not rely on these external regulators so that we can be fully present for one another? And what Dr. van der Kolk says is we have to think about two things concurrently. We want to activate social engagement at the same time we're calming the physical tensions in the body. And activating social engagement can happen through our regular ways of actually getting together, but they can also happen through parallel play. You know, if we know that people are drumming in one home and we're drumming in ours, that can be a method of social engagement, that parallel play. And drumming is known to calm the physical tensions in the body. We can use theater, we can use exercise, we can use play. In fact, my grandchildren are spending more time outside riding bikes. They're brother and sister, so they're activating their social engagement because they live in the same household they can. But riding bikes is a way to calm the physical tensions in the body. And it's also using lateral movement. Both sides of the body are engaged. All of that is really vital for helping people self-regulate. So we can be creative and not worry about this list of 8 exact things, but rather be thinking of ways that we can activate socially in ways that we're calming our bodies. And so I want you to reflect for yourself, what are the self-regulation practices that you're using and what are you modeling for others? What practices might we want to add to our ways of being? I know for me, I'm doing a lot of gardening. I'm sewing masks. You know, I'm engaging with people on Zoom, but I'm also taking time for myself just to walk. I do an appreciation walk every morning. And then I talk to my grandchildren and the other children in my life about, here's what I did today for myself to help me stay regulated through stressful times. What have you done? And invite that sharing. Our executive function can be affected by stress, and executive function includes 11 different kinds of skills. I'm not going to take a lot of time on them, so we don't have a lot of time today. But they include things like our working memory and our emotional control, our ability to inhibit our response, and these executive function skills are skills. We build them over time, and children begin building executive function skills right away when they're first born, or certainly in the first couple of years of life. And then we don't really finish building these skills while we continue to have the chance to build them our whole lives. But the sensitive developmental period where it's easiest to be building them and weaving them together is actually in our 20s and between our teen years and about age 28 or 29. And so these executive function skills are largely in place, and we have to work harder if we didn't get a chance to build them in that time. But many of the family units we're working with, both the children and the adults are in a sensitive developmental period where we're building these skills. And I wanted to just let you know that it's normal to have executive dysfunction when we're stressed. I'm hearing a lot of people say, I don't know, I'm just not remembering things as well. That's normal. Under stress, all of us have difficulty with verbal memory and working memory. We also have a hard time with something called processing loads. If you've had the feeling that, oh my goodness, my brain feels full and then only worked for half the day and not, usually I can work 10 hours and my brain doesn't feel full. Now I work for a few hours and I have to go for a walk and then come back. Processing loads are something that's normal to be affected. Our ability to generalize can be affected. And then our ability to get started on things. Initiating can be difficult, as can organizing and planning. And all of these are normal responses. So when we have adults that are saying, you should be able to tackle these academics at home, right? We have to remember that the children who are stressed are going to have a difficult time with processing loads, with memory, with initiating, and with the kind of academic thinking that requires generalizing. So here are some things that help. Repetition, practicing executive function skills. We always continue to develop them, and so practicing them. I think it's important to verbalize this is normal to have some challenges here. And so how are we accommodating? Are we giving more frequent breaks to calm the body before we take the next step in whatever process we're using, for example? Social support. So learning from one another is a really valuable method of social support, but we're all inventing new ways, right, to generate social support. And then self-care. So I want to spend a couple minutes here on self-care because the adults investing in self-care is one of the ways that children learn how to live through stressful times. And I would say that's the number one thing they're learning right now. They're not really learning that much about academics. They're learning how do you navigate a stressful time. So self-care. One is mindfulness, being present in the moment in a non-judgmental and observational way. And I think for children, hearing adults observe, gee, this is how I feel right now, or I was feeling agitated until I went for a run and now I'm feeling calmer. So verbalizing, what are we doing to be present and help our bodies be present? Breathing, deep belly breaths, key to staying present in our bodies. And so mindfulness, one practice that can help us with self-care. Diaphragmatic breathing, breathing from the belly, stimulates the body's rest and digest mode. It improves the chemical in our brain that helps us calm, GABA, and helps us relieve anxiety. So just deep belly breathing can be really helpful at this time. And it decreases the chemical activators, the fight, flight, freeze response, and allows us then not to feel that we're in danger every moment at a chemical level. It's not an intellectual level, it's at the body level. We want to try to reduce those chemicals that make us feel like we have to fight or run or freeze. Certainly movement and music and dance and exercise, all of these are vital for self-care. And I think that's one of the ways we can put into place this parallel play and create amazing opportunity. Maybe even the whole neighborhood. We can't necessarily see each other, but we can hear each other singing from the porches, or we can set up that at this time of day, we're going to spend 20 minutes, all of us drumming or all of us dancing. And we have a feeling then of being present with one another, even if we're not closer than 6 feet. And then sleep. Sleep is so vital, and most people don't get enough sleep, and it's absolutely essential, especially in this time. And many of us are finding we need more sleep than we usually get. And laughter. So are we spending time just laughing? And, you know, I like to tell a quick story. When my mom was in the last stages of her life, she died of complications from dementia. my daughter and I would go and visit. And my daughter said, you know, Mama can't really even know what we're saying to her. She doesn't know who we are. But let's just try laughing, Mom. You know, laughing is good for you. And so maybe we'll just go and laugh. So we would go and we'd sit in her nursing home room and we would just laugh. We didn't have to tell any jokes. We would just laugh, and my mom would laugh and laugh with us. So we don't even have to have a reason for laughter. We can just generate laughter, and it's calming to the body, it's soothing, it's good for the GABA, it's good for dopamine, it's good for all of those feel-good chemicals. And if we just spend part of every day in laughter, however we generate it, that is a really good thing for self-care. So in the end, flourishing child well-being, family well-being, it begins with a new understanding of what we used to think of as a problem. And when we think of kids, we often think that they're having bad behavior, they're making bad choices, but hyperarousal, that readiness for danger, can look like misbehavior or bad temper. And that's true for children, but it's also true for adults. And so can we just have the habit of verbalizing, maybe it's too stressful a moment, what should we do for our care and for the care of our families, and help us self-soothe. I wanted just to mention, because I didn't do much talk about culture in this talk, but I often do, that all of these methods of reducing stress and self-care are culture bound. And so if we don't understand the culture of a people, it's going to be hard for us to make recommendations about self-care and about self-soothing and about well-being during stressful times. So this is a quote from Bonnie and Eduardo Duran. They say, reclaiming cultural ways after a time of loss is a powerful driver of well-being. One of the first things that has to be done is to ask the community what is important to the community. So for this time we're in now, and as we come out of our isolation and quarantine, that's probably the number one thing we need to pay attention to, are the cultural differences that we may have and the cultural respect that we exercise by asking. Hope, often thought to be the cornerstone of well-being, has three elements. We have to be able to imagine that there is a better future. We have to be able to see a path to that future, and we have to be able to imagine oneself on that path. And that's really important. You know, when we think about, we imagine a better future where we're well and where we're able to get back into our community life, what is the path to that future? The path to that future is distancing, which safeguards the vulnerable, the elder, the community as a whole. And I could be on the path. I can participate in that. Oops. So in closing, I want to say the number one thing to keep in mind is unconditional positive regard. And that notion that as we are sensing one another, as we're seeing each other through Zoom, as we're engaging with one another, let's not forget the joy in knowing another human being, and to express that joy and to feel the love that might be a little bit hard to feel across Zoom, but we can still generate and feel that deep appreciation, that longing to be with one another, and that is at the heart of child well-being. So thank you. You may have questions or comments.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was great. I learned a lot. We did have one question from the field. It was asked, if physical distancing continues long-term, do you think we'll see students having social skill deficits, perhaps, when they return to school or their normal functioning?
I think we'll have to do more intentional teaching of social skills. I think that could be good, because I think we probably need to do more intentional teaching of social skills all the time. But I think the social skill deficit will be less a matter of social distancing and more a matter of how stressful their households have been while they were at home. Because very high levels of stress, especially in middle childhood, 7 to 11, 12, in that range, can make it difficult to perceive social cues. And then you have to learn more about social relationship through rules and direct instruction instead of just perceiving the cues. So there are many, many people in this world who, if I were to cross my arms and get kind of a snarly face, they wouldn't pick up that social cue that I was being impatient about something. And that's true with all different kinds of social cues. And so we have to get better at verbalizing them.
Excellent. You mentioned that there was the simple rules, take care of self. You mentioned take care of school. I'm curious to pick your brain. Do you have any tips for taking care of school or virtual ways to do this right now? I know you mentioned art and music, but.
I think helping children to remember what they loved about school, because there's also virtual school in people's minds, right? And so, children a lot do things through art and music, actually also through games. Maybe there are ways that there could be gaming that helps kids retain the social network, especially at the older ages, through gaming. And, I recently listened to Bruce Perry talk about, usually we want to limit screen time, and we do want to limit screen time, but gaming can be helping kids with self-regulation and helping them with concentration and some of these things that are getting interrupted by the stress in our world. So we don't want to completely eliminate that, but maybe find ways that kids can do gaming through more social kinds of activities where there are people playing games together who are not in the same room.
Excellent. And one last kind of fun question. Are there any unique ways you found to stay connected while we've been physically distancing from each other?
Let's see, how have I think the main thing that I've been doing is more like parallel play. It's more like I have a group of friends, we're all gardeners, and so we're out gardening and we have a sense that we're all doing that. And we get together on the phone or through Zoom or Skype or FaceTime and maybe just have a little snippet of sharing, but most of the time we've been in our independent worlds but doing a similar activity. And recently I was talking to a neighborhood where they were doing singing and drumming like that, and they were imagining that when they came out of this time of social isolation, they could organize a neighborhood parade where they could walk down the street and share the drumming or the singing that they had been doing during this time. So that kind of activity where we're holding the hope, right? There's going to be a better future, and we know the path to it, and we're going to participate in co-creating that future through the activities we have now.
Excellent. All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. I want to encourage everybody watching to learn more about Laura Porter's work. You can find her website on the bottom of the screen, but it's www.aceinterface.com. And we encourage you all to be well. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Molly.